Shabbat Shalom. It's so lovely to see our Mishkan quite full, despite it being that lull between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There is a charming story based on the Talmud about the very first Rosh Hashanah, which goes something as follows. It goes that Adam was amazed by everything in the Garden of Eden, the smells of the flowers, the sounds of the birds, but what amazed him most of all was the sun, warming his face though he could not touch it. Of course, the sun then sank, leaving him in the dark, cold and shivering and afraid. After some time, Adam fell asleep and was pleasantly surprised to be awakened by the warmth of the sun on the back of his neck. Relieved and reassured that the sun would stay, he was alarmed when the sun began to sink lower and lower behind the garden once more. So he built a barricade, piling stuff upon things and things upon stuff, in the hopes that the sun would hit the pile of objects and not be able to sink any lower past it. Yet Adam was soon cold and shivering in the dark and terrified. God had to explain to Adam that this was part of the cycle of nature, that the sun would continue to sink over and over, and that there was nothing he could do about it. God then told Adam that there was nothing to worry about, because the sun would rise again over the other side of the garden in just a few hours' time. God continued to explain that the separation of light from dark and day from night was called time, outlining that one sunset to another was one day, that 7 sunsets was 1 week, 4 weeks of sun sinking was 1 month, and 11 months of sun's sinking was 1 year. Adam felt calmer, figuring that, wonderful, after 1 day, it's all right, because there are still 6 more until the week is over. And after 1 week, there are still 3 weeks until the month is over, and 11 months until the year is over. Adam then went about using his time, not thinking much of it until he realized that 11 months, 3 weeks, and 6 days had been used up. Then it hit him. I've used up all the time. Not just my time, but all the time. Tonight the sun will sink and it will never rise again, because this is the end of time. So Adam gathered his animal friends and said goodbye, and they hugged and wept and bundled up together until, lo and behold, the sun peeped over the edge of the garden the first day of the 2nd year. In the distance, Adam heard God counting. 10 years is 1 decade, 10 decades is 1 century, 10 centuries is 1 millennia, and so on until Adam fell soundly asleep. When he woke up, Adam smelled the flowers, heard the birds singing, and thanked God for making time way big enough. I told this story to the children of our congregation over Rosh Hashanah, causing me to reflect upon our relationship with Jewish time. On one hand, we are beholden to it. This can be illustrated, for example, through the repetition of the number 7 in our Torah. As referenced in Vayelech, our week's parashah, every 7 years we observe the Shemitah, in which we leave the land fallow to rest. This helps us determine when our produce began to grow, so that we know when a portion of it, the Bikurim, the first fruits, should be brought to the temple in Jerusalem to be offered to God. From the Torah, we also know that in 7 days the world was created, and on the 7th day, the end of the first week, we received the precious gift of the Shabbat. Additionally, there is a rather beautiful picture painted of our ancient system for notifying the community when that 4th week had ended and the new month had arrived. Legend has it that once the new moon was sighted, a fire was lit on the top of the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem by a representative of the Sanhedrin, the ancient rabbinical court, and the people watching on their nearby hills would light their own fires. In this way, the news and the light would be passed from town to town, village to village, home to home, until the new month was heralded in and word of this occasion spread far and wide. This caused a dilemma to those who lived outside of the land of Israel, in the diaspora, because they would receive the message a little later, being scattered across the four corners of the earth. Subsequently, they would ensure that their bases were covered by commemorating 2 days of each of the biblical festivals, such as Pesach and Sukkot, in an era before clocks and watches. It was the advent of these technologies which caused most Reformed communities to do away with this second day of Chag, with no need to wait for word of the new moon any longer. Interestingly, there is an exception to this rule, one which is poignant at this point in our Jewish calendar: the celebration of 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Being the first day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah is the only Jewish holy day that falls on Rosh Chodesh, the heralding of the new moon. Since the new moon can appear at either 29 or 30 days, we learn that there could be safek or doubt over which was the real first day of the month, since there were no other signifiers, no fires on the hill or witnesses who could testify to its accuracy. Rosh Hashanah is therefore known as Yom Arichta, one long day, and as a result, many across the Reform world, including our own congregation, have chosen to either maintain or reinstate this tradition. Which leads us to ask, why is it so important that we as Jews keep time? Perhaps there's a practical reason. For our rabbis, and even us too in the modern day, we need delineations of time in order to know when to observe a festival or the Shemitah year, or when to pray in the morning or the evening, and so on. We need, on this inherent level, the routine and the reliability that a calendar gives our lives. If we did not adhere to some sort of calendar, some sort of cycle, could you imagine celebrating Pesach in December, or Hanukkah in May, or Shabbat on a Thursday? Yet, this raises the notion that time is strange, for it is not linear or logical. Vayelech is, after all, the parasha in which Moses expresses that Ben me'ah ve'esrim shana anochi, I'm 120 years old. Obviously well past the natural lifespan, it would be, well, natural to ask, was Moses really 120 when he died? According to Rashi, probably not. Such a statement simply meant that the days of the years of Moses were full. In other words, it was his time. So when we see in our Tanakh that Adam, our protagonist from the beginning, lived to 930 years old, it might not actually mean that Adam was truly 930 years old when he died. It might instead be an indication that he was an important person as the first person, and that he was fortunate enough to see old age. Time, therefore, becomes a state of being, at one stage of life or another, from one moment in our life's journey to the next. Consider this phenomenon in our own lives too, in which time has both caught our breath and allowed us to catch our breath. Think of those moments in which time seems to stand still, whether from the shattering shock of a devastating diagnosis, the skip heartbeat adrenaline of meeting your beloved under the chuppah, or the minute of silence that we took yesterday on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. There are moments that we feel go on forever, but in actuality last mere seconds. The split-second eternity of forgetting a word when we make a presentation to our colleagues, or the slow-motion spill of the coffee cup as it crashes off the kitchen counter. There are moments too that we wish could go on forever. a lazy afternoon by the lake with friends, or a family dinner celebrating a Jewish holy day. We've equally all had those moments where time has not seemed to matter, where, as the sayings go, time has run away from us, or we've lost track of time. And here the examples are too many to name. Put differently, despite our best efforts to compartmentalize it, time often has its own plans. Perhaps it is because, upon reflection, time is not truly about racing the clock. If we take a step back, for our rabbis, time was not so much about the calendar, but about the ability to perform the mitzvot connected to the calendar. When was the right time to eat matzah, to light the Hanukkah candles, to fast on Yom Kippur, to build and dwell in a sukkah? As for our parasha, when Moses is told that his time is up, what does he do? Instead of despairing, he, quote, puts down in writing the words of his teaching until his very end, end quote. He then places them beside the Aron HaKodesh that it may travel with his people as they enter their new home and be passed from generation to generation. So intent is Moses that his people may prosper and continue on the path of God. When it comes to observing 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, why is it that Reform Jews have largely held on to this tradition? Apart from our desire to balance tradition and modernity in this world in which we have speedy communication, we can also look to our brothers and sisters in Israel. With word always being able to circulate much quicker within the land itself, there was never any doubt about when a festival observance began, and therefore no need to observe more than 1 day of Chag. Subsequently, we in the Reformed diaspora now align ourselves with our Israeli brethren, not just in spirit or space when we visit, but in time too. This solidarity applies to our broader calendar as well. The desire to fulfill mitzvot may be compelling, but let us look at both our deeds, and in our hearts as well. How does it feel to imagine, to dream, of millions of Jews around the world lighting Shabbat candles simultaneously, telling the Pesach story in unison, calling out Tikiyah Gedolah at the end of Yom Kippur as Agudah Echad, one united people? This image, our rabbis teach us, is powerful, for it is the unity of our Jewish family that brings teshuvah in every sense of the word, making wrongs right and making us whole again, bringing us each home into the fold. Therefore, a lesson learned from Anita Diamond's book, Living a Jewish Life, is learned. Time might instead be about an expression of the values that a particular state of being at a particular moment in time perpetuates, whether that is performing mitzvot, ensuring a bright future for the next generation, or a deep connection to the land and the people of Israel. So we can ask ourselves, what is the value that we are expressing here today on this Shabbat Shuvah, found in the middle of what admittedly feels like the eye of the storm between the stateliness of Rosh Hashanah and the sobriety of Yom Kippur? It is akin to the Kol Dmama, that still small voice heard among the resounding blasts of the shofar, reminding us that we continue to be found in the midst of the High Holy Days, that sacred time of rebirth, renewal, and reflection. The special liturgical inserts into our Amidah that you might have noticed, such as the inclusion of Zohrenu or the emendation from Ha'el HaKadosh to HaMelech HaKadosh, are a subtle wink to the idea that the King is still in the field, that God is still among the people as the book of life remains open, if only for a few more days. It is a reminder of the hope that we can feel at this extra time we are granted to make teshuvah, that we may yet turn the corner and return to ourselves and our God and be inscribed for a radiant future. When we say goodbye to Shabbat tonight, then, during our Havdalah ceremony, a demarcation of time in and of itself as we praise God as the one who separates bein Kodesh l'chol, between the holy and the everyday, Perhaps we can see it not as welcoming back in our regular lives, but rather as a separation ben Kodesh leKodesh, from holy to holy, as we remain rooted in this sacred time of the Yamim Noraim. Finally, as we move from Kodesh to Kodesh, from Shabbat to Yom Kippur on this Shabbat Shuvah, let us conclude with this blessing for our times. May we mark our time as sacred and use it wisely. May time be way big enough for us to thrive, bringing with it the promise of tomorrow. May time teach us who we truly are as we reflect on our days and work towards who we wish to be. May we be pleasantly surprised by what time has in store for us. Gmar Chatima Tova and Shabbat Shalom.